Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Life-Changing True Stories today, Abigail. Monroe had always believed in working hard and staying focused. When she landed the marketing coordinator position at Hartwell Industries, she felt like all her dreams were finally coming true. The sleek glass building in downtown Chicago, the generous salary, the opportunity to work with some of the brightest minds in the industry, everything was perfect. She arrived early every morning, stayed late into the evening, and poured her heart into every project. Her dedication didn't go unnoticed. Julian Hartwell, the young CEO who had taken over the family business just 3 years prior, began to pay special attention to her work. At first, it was professional. He would stop by her desk to compliment a campaign she had developed or ask her opinion during strategy meetings. Abigail felt proud that someone as accomplished as Julian valued her input. But then something shifted. The professional courtesy evolved into something warmer, something neither of them had planned. It started with coffee. Julian asked if she wanted to grab a cup after a particularly grueling presentation. They talked for 2 hours in a quiet cafe several blocks from the office, got discussing everything from marketing trends to their favorite books. Abigail found herself laughing more than she had in months. Julian was different when he wasn't behind his desk. He was funny, surprisingly humble, and genuinely interested in what she had to say. That coffee turned into dinner the following week. Dinner became a regular occurrence. Before long, they were meeting outside of work constantly, always careful to choose places where colleagues wouldn't spot them. Abigail knew she was treading dangerous ground. Dating the boss was complicated, messy, and could potentially destroy everything she had worked for. But when Julian looked at her with those warm hazel eyes, when he reached across the table to hold her hand, when he told her she was the most genuine person he had ever met, all the logical reasons to stop melted away. She was falling in love completely and hopelessly. Their relationship intensified over the following months. They would text throughout the day, sending each other inside jokes that no one else would understand. Julian would find excuses to call her into his office just to steal a quick kiss when no one was looking. On weekends, they would drive out to the countryside, far from anyone who might recognize them, and just be together without the weight of secrecy pressing down on them. Those moments felt like freedom. One evening, as they sat on a blanket watching the sunset over a quiet lake, Julian pulled her close and whispered that he loved her. Abigail felt her heart swell with joy. She had never felt so connected to another person, so understood, so cherished. She told him she loved him too, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. They talked about the future that night, about how they would eventually go public with their relationship, about how they would handle the inevitable gossip and judgment. Julian promised her that they would face it together, that nothing would tear them apart, but promises Abigail would learn were fragile things. The change came suddenly and without warning. Julian started canceling their plans, claiming urgent business matters. His texts became shorter, less personal. When they did see each other, he seemed distant, preoccupied, like his mind was somewhere else entirely. Abigail tried to talk to him about it, tried to understand what was happening, but he kept brushing her off. The warmth in his eyes had been replaced by something cold and unreachable. Then came the day that shattered everything. Julian asked her to meet him at a hotel bar downtown. Abigail arrived with a knot of dread in her stomach. She could tell by the way he sat rigid in his chair, or by the way he wouldn't quite meet her eyes, that something terrible was about to happen. When he finally spoke, his words were like ice. He said their relationship had been a mistake, that it was unprofessional and couldn't continue. He claimed he had gotten carried away, that mixing business with personal feelings was reckless. He said he needed to focus on the company and that she should do the same. Abigail sat there stunned, unable to process what she was hearing. How could the man who had told her he loved her just weeks ago now sit there and reduce everything they shared to a mistake? She tried to argue, tried to make him see reason, but Julian had already shut down emotionally. He apologized stiffly, said he hoped they could remain professional colleagues, and then left her sitting there alone with a half-finished drink and a broken heart. The days that followed were the darkest Abigail had ever experienced. She considered quitting immediately, but needed the income. so she forced herself to return to work. Seeing Julian in meetings, watching him interact with everyone as if nothing had happened, was torture. He treated her with polite professionalism, like she was just another employee. Like they hadn't shared intimate moments and whispered promises to each other. The pain was unbearable. Finally, after 3 weeks of agony, Abigail made the decision to resign. She couldn't stay in that environment, couldn't continue seeing the man. She loved every day while pretending she felt nothing. She submitted her resignation letter to Human Resources, packed her belongings into a cardboard box, and walked out of Hartwell Industries without saying goodbye to anyone. Starting over felt impossible, but staying would have destroyed her completely. Abigail found a small apartment in a quieter neighborhood and took a position at a much smaller marketing firm. The pay was considerably less, and the work wasn't as challenging, but at least she could breathe again. At least she wasn't confronted with constant reminders of Julian. Then came the morning sickness. At first, Abigail attributed it to stress. She had been through an emotional ordeal after all. Her body was probably just reacting to the upheaval. But when the nausea persisted and her period was 2 weeks late, a terrifying possibility crept into her mind. She bought 3 different pregnancy tests from 3 different pharmacies, not quite believing what was happening. When all 3 showed positive results, Abigail felt the floor drop out from beneath her. She was pregnant with Julian's baby. The man who had discarded her like she meant nothing, who had broken her heart so thoroughly, was the father of the child growing inside her. Abigail spent an entire day crying, overwhelmed by fear and uncertainty. She had no family support system nearby. Her parents had passed away years ago, and she was an only child. Her friends were mostly work acquaintances who had drifted away after she left Hartwell Industries. She was facing this alone. The thought of telling Julian crossed her mind repeatedly. He had a right to know, didn't he? But every time she reached for her phone, she remembered the coldness in his voice when he ended things, the way he had made her feel small and insignificant. What if he accused her of trying to trap him? What if he thought she was lying or trying to manipulate him into resuming their relationship? The humiliation would be too much. Abigail decided she would handle this pregnancy on her own. She didn't need Julian Hartwell or his family's money. She would be strong for her baby. The months crawled by slowly. Abigail worked as long as her body would allow, saving every penny she could. She attended prenatal appointments alone, sitting in waiting rooms full of excited couples while she clutched her purse and tried not to feel sorry for herself. She assembled the crib by herself, painted the nursery walls a soft yellow by herself, bought tiny clothes and blankets by herself. Every milestone of the pregnancy was experienced in solitude, but Abigail refused to let loneliness defeat her. This baby would be loved, even if it was just the 2 of them. When labor began on a quiet Tuesday evening, Abigail called a taxi to take her to the hospital. The pain was intense, more than she had imagined, but she pushed through it with grim determination. Hours later, after what felt like an eternity, she heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby crying. The nurse placed a tiny, perfect baby boy in her arms, and Abigail felt her heart expand in ways she didn't know were possible. All the pain, all the loneliness, all the fear vanished in that instant. This was her son. She named him Oliver, a name she had always loved. Oliver had a thick tuft of dark hair and the most expressive eyes. As Abigail studied his face, she noticed with a pang that he looked remarkably like Julian. The same shaped eyes, the same nose, even the small dimple in his chin. Her son carried his father's features, a permanent reminder of the man she had tried so hard to forget. But she pushed those thoughts aside. Oliver was hers, and she would give him all the love in the world. A week after bringing Oliver home, Abigail found herself overwhelmed with emotion. She had barely slept, her body ached, and yet she had never felt more purposeful. Holding her sleeping son in the afternoon light streaming through her window, she snapped a photo. Oliver looked so peaceful, so perfect. On impulse, she decided to post the picture to her Instagram account, which she had barely used in months. She typed a simple caption about new beginnings and fresh starts, about how this little person had changed her entire world. Then she hit post and set her phone aside, not thinking much of it. Meanwhile, across the city in his luxury penthouse, Julian Hartwell was having another sleepless night. He hadn't been able to rest properly since the day he walked away from Abigail. The breakup had been necessary, he kept telling himself, but it hadn't made it any less agonizing. His mother had discovered their relationship and threatened to use every connection. She had to ruin Abigail's career if Julian didn't end things immediately. Unable to see Abigail hurt because of him, he had chosen the cowardly path. He destroyed their relationship to save her from his mother's wrath. But the guilt aided him every single day. Julian picked up his phone. Scrolling mindlessly through social media, as he often did during these sleepless hours, he still followed Abigail's account, though he knew he shouldn't. He had resisted the urge to reach out to her countless times, knowing she probably hated him. When his feed refreshed and her new post appeared, his breath caught in his throat. A baby. Abigail had posted a photo of a newborn baby. Julian's hands began to shake as he enlarged the image, studying every detail of the infant's face. The timestamp said the photo was posted just hours ago. His mind raced, calculating dates and possibilities. The baby had dark hair and features that looked hauntingly familiar. Those eyes, that chin, the shape of the nose. Julian felt his entire world tilt on its axis. Could it be possible? He zoomed in further on the photo, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The resemblance was undeniable. This baby looked exactly like Julian had looked in his own infant photos. He stumbled to his feet, pacing his apartment frantically. Abigail had been pregnant. She had gone through an entire pregnancy alone and never said a word. The realization hit him like a freight train. He had a son. Julian barely remembered getting dressed or grabbing his car keys. His mind was spinning with 1,000 questions, 1,000 emotions he couldn't quite name. Dawn was just breaking over Chicago as he drove through the empty streets, toward the address he still had saved in his phone. Abigail's address. He had never deleted it, just like he had never deleted her number or any of the photos they had taken together. He had kept all of it, hidden away like precious artifacts from a life he had destroyed with his own hands. When he arrived at her apartment building, Julian sat in his car for several minutes, trying to gather his thoughts. What would he even say to her? How could he possibly explain why he had abandoned her? The truth about his mother's threats sounded like a weak excuse now, especially if Abigail had been carrying his child all along. He took a deep breath, stepped out of the car, and made his way up to her third-floor apartment. Standing outside her door, he hesitated before finally knocking inside. Abigail had just finished feeding Oliver when she heard the knock. She wasn't expecting anyone. Carefully placing the baby in his bassinet, she walked to the door and peered through the peephole. Her heart stopped. Julian Hartwell stood on the other side, looking disheveled and anxious, so different from the polished CEO she remembered. For a moment, she considered not opening the door at all. What could he possibly want after all this time? But something in his expression made her pause. He looked desperate, almost broken. She opened the door slowly, and their eyes met. Neither spoke for a long moment. Julian looked older somehow, tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. Abigail felt her defenses rising automatically, her arms crossing over her chest. She refused to let him see how his sudden appearance affected her. How just seeing his face again made her heart ache with memories she had tried so hard to bury. Julian spoke first, his voice rough and uncertain. He said he had seen her photo, the one with the baby. He needed to know the truth. Was that child his son? Abigail felt anger flare hot in her chest. After everything he had put her through, after the way he had discarded her so cruelly, now he showed up demanding answers. She wanted to slam the door in his face, wanted to tell him it was none of his business. But she was tired of carrying secrets, tired of being alone with the weight of everything. Yes, she told him flatly. Oliver was his son. She had been pregnant when he ended their relationship so coldly. She had gone through the entire pregnancy by herself, every appointment, every frightening moment, every sleepless night. She had given birth alone, brought their son home alone, and figured out how to be a mother completely on her own. And where had Julian been through all of it? Living his comfortable life, running his company, probably not thinking about her at all. Julian looked like she had physically struck him. The color drained from his face, as the reality of what she was saying sank in. He asked why she hadn't told him, his voice breaking slightly. Abigail laughed bitterly at the question. How could she have told him? He had made it perfectly clear that their relationship was a mistake, that she was a mistake. She wasn't about to give him the opportunity to reject her again, or worse, to think she was trying to manipulate him into staying with her. He stepped forward, asking if he could come inside. Abigail hesitated, every instinct telling her to keep him at a distance. But they couldn't have this conversation in the hallway where neighbors might hear. Reluctantly, she stepped aside and let him enter her small apartment. Julian's eyes immediately went to the bassinet, where Oliver slept peacefully. He moved toward it slowly, as if drawn by an invisible force. When he looked down at the baby, Abigail watched his face transform. There was wonder there, and pain, something that looked like overwhelming love. Julian reached out tentatively, then pulled his hand back, uncertain if he had the right to touch his own son. Abigail felt something soften in her chest despite her anger. She told him quietly that he could hold Oliver if he wanted. With shaking hands, Julian carefully lifted the sleeping baby, cradling him against his chest with such tenderness that Abigail felt tears prick her eyes. Julian stared down at Oliver's face, taking in every detail, and when he looked back up at Abigail, there were tears streaming down his face. He apologized then, the words tumbling out in a rush. He was so sorry for everything, for the way he had ended things, for not being there, for all of it. Abigail felt her anger wavering but forced herself to hold firm. Sorry wasn't enough. Sorry, didn't make up for 9 months of struggling alone. Julian nodded, acknowledging that she was right. He knew he couldn't take back the past or undo the damage he had caused. But he wanted to explain, needed her to understand why he had done what he did, so Julian told her everything. He explained how his mother, Catherine Hartwell, had discovered their relationship through a private investigator she had hired. Catherine had always been controlling, obsessed with maintaining the family's image and social standing. When she learned that Julian was involved with an employee, someone she deemed beneath their social class, she had been furious. Catherine had confronted Julian privately and delivered an ultimatum. Either he ended the relationship immediately, or she would use every connection she had in the business world to ensure that Abigail never worked in marketing again. She would destroy Abigail's career, her reputation, everything. Abigail listened to this revelation with growing shock. She remembered the day Catherine had come to her apartment all those months ago, offering her money to disappear from Julian's life. Abigail had refused the bribe with dignity, but she hadn't realized the extent of Catherine's threats against Julian. He explained that he had been terrified of what his mother might do. Catherine was ruthless when she wanted to be, and Julian knew she would follow through on her threats. He thought he was protecting Abigail by pushing her away, by making the breakup seem cold and final. He thought if he hurt her badly enough, she would move on and be safe from his mother's vindictiveness. But Julian admitted now that he had been a coward. He should have told Abigail the truth, should have fought for their relationship, instead of giving in to his mother's manipulation. He had let fear control him, and in doing so, he had hurt the woman he loved and abandoned his own child before he even knew the baby existed. The regret in his voice was palpable, and Abigail found herself fighting against the sympathy rising in her chest. She didn't want to feel sorry for him. He had made his choices. Julian looked at her with desperate sincerity and said he wanted to be part of Oliver's life. He wanted to be a real father, not just a name on a birth certificate or a monthly check. He wanted to be there for the late nights and the early mornings, for the first words and the first steps. He wanted everything he had already missed and everything that was still to come. And if Abigail would let him, he wanted to be part of her life too. He had never stopped loving her, not for a single day. Abigail felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. Part of her wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that he had really changed. But another part of her, the part that had been shattered by his rejection, was terrified of being hurt again. She told him that he could visit Oliver, could start being a father, but that was all she could offer right now. She needed time to heal, time to learn if she could ever trust him again. Julian agreed immediately, grateful for even that small opening. Over the following weeks, Julian became a constant presence in their lives. He showed up every day, sometimes twice a day, always bringing something they needed. Diapers, formula, groceries, anything Abigail mentioned in passing. At first, she accepted his help stiffly, maintaining her emotional distance. But as she watched him with Oliver, something began to shift. Julian was genuinely trying. He changed diapers without complaint, even the really messy ones. He walked the floor with Oliver during crying fits, singing off-key lullabies that somehow soothed the baby. He researched everything he could about infant care, asking Abigail endless questions about feeding schedules and sleep patterns. One particularly difficult night, when Oliver wouldn't stop crying, and Abigail was at her breaking point from exhaustion, Julian took the baby from her arms and told her to rest. She protested weakly, but Julian insisted. He spent the next 3 hours walking around her small living room, gently bouncing Oliver and murmuring soft words until the baby finally settled. When Abigail woke up from an accidental nap on the couch, she found Julian still holding their sleeping son, looking down at him with such pure love that it made her chest ache. Julian started cooking meals for her. Nothing fancy, but warm and nourishing. He did her dishes without being asked. He picked up groceries on his way over. He learned Oliver's routines and quirks as if he had been there from the beginning. Abigail found herself looking forward to his visits, found herself relaxing around him bit by bit. They began talking again, really talking, about everything except their past relationship. They discussed Oliver's development, shared funny stories from their days, slowly rebuilding a connection. One evening, after putting Oliver down for the night, they sat together on Abigail's worn couch. Julian turned to her and said softly that he understood if she never forgave him, never trusted him again romantically. But he wanted her to know that these past weeks, being with her and Oliver, had been the happiest of his life. Not because of his success or his money, but because he was finally where he belonged. With his family, Abigail felt something inside her finally break free. She had been holding on to her hurt and anger so tightly, using it as armor to protect herself. But sitting there with Julian, seeing the man he had become, the father he was choosing to be, she realized she didn't want to hold on to the pain anymore. She told him quietly that she had never stopped loving him either, as much as she had tried. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Julian reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't move, he took her hand in his. His touch was warm and familiar, and Abigail felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Julian brushed them away gently with his thumb and told her he would spend the rest of his life proving that she could trust him. He would never abandon her or Oliver again. Whatever it took, however long it took, he would show her that they deserved to be a family. The fragile peace they had built was shattered on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Abigail was preparing Oliver's bottle when she heard a firm knock at the door. Julian wasn't due to visit for another few hours, so she was surprised. Opening the door, she found herself face to face with Catherine Hartwell. The older woman stood there in an expensive designer suit, her expression one of cool disdain as she surveyed Abigail's modest apartment. Catherine didn't wait for an invitation. She simply walked past Abigail into the apartment, her critical gaze sweeping over the small space. Abigail felt her hackles rise immediately. She asked coldly what Catherine was doing there. The older woman turned to her with a thin smile and said she had come to meet her grandson. She had learned that Julian had discovered the baby's existence and had been spending considerable time here. As Oliver's grandmother, she naturally wanted to see the child for herself. Abigail moved protectively toward Oliver's bassinet. She told Catherine firmly that she wasn't welcome here, not after what she had done to separate Abigail and Julian. Catherine raised an eyebrow, asking if Julian had told her about their little arrangement. Yes, Abigail confirmed. She knew everything. Catherine shrugged elegantly, showing no remorse. She had done what any mother would do to protect her son from an unsuitable match. The insult landed exactly as Catherine intended. But Abigail refused to let it show. Catherine moved closer to the bassinet, looking down at Oliver with an appraising expression. She commented that the baby did have the Hartwell features, then turned back to Abigail with calculating eyes. Catherine said she had come to make a proposal. Oliver deserved to be raised with all the advantages the Hartwell name could provide. The best schools, the best opportunities, exposure to culture and refinement. Surely Abigail could see that she couldn't provide those things on her limited income. Abigail felt ice run through her veins as she realized what Catherine was suggesting. The older woman continued smoothly, explaining that Oliver should come live at the Hartwell estate. He would have his own wing, the finest nannies, everything a child could possibly need. Abigail could visit, of course, perhaps on weekends. Catherine made it sound so reasonable, so logical. But Abigail heard the real message clearly. Catherine wanted to take her son away from her. The anger that surged through Abigail was unlike anything she had ever felt. She stepped forward, placing herself between Catherine and Oliver. Her voice shook with fury as she told Catherine that would never happen. Oliver was her son, and no amount of money or social standing would ever change that. She had carried him, given birth to him, cared for him every single day of his life. Catherine had no right to waltz in and make demands. Catherine's pleasant facade cracked slightly. She pointed out sharply that Abigail lived in a cramped apartment, worked a mediocre job, and could barely afford quality childcare. Was that really the life Abigail wanted for her son? One of struggle and limitation? Oliver had Hartwell blood in his veins. He deserved better than this poverty. The word poverty hung in the air like a slap. Abigail felt humiliated and furious in equal measure. She told Catherine that love mattered more than money, that Oliver was surrounded by genuine affection in this small apartment, something he would never find in the cold Hartwell mansion. Catherine laughed at that, a sharp, cruel sound. She said that love didn't pay for college tuition or medical care. Love didn't open doors in society. Abigail was being selfish, clinging to the child when she couldn't give him the life he deserved. Abigail had heard enough. She walked to the door and opened it wide, telling Catherine to leave immediately. If she ever came back or tried to interfere with Oliver again, Abigail would get a restraining order. Catherine's eyes flashed with anger at being dismissed. She warned Abigail that she was making a powerful enemy, that the Hartwell family had ways of getting what they wanted. Abigail stood firm, repeating her demand that Catherine leave. With a final venomous look, Catherine swept out of the apartment. The moment the door closed, Abigail's legs gave out. She sank to the floor, shaking with adrenaline and fear. Catherine's threats echoed in her mind. Could the woman really take Oliver away? Did she have that kind of power? Abigail picked up her phone with trembling hands and called Julian. He answered on the second ring, and the words tumbled out of her in a rush. She told him about Catherine's visit, about the custody demand, about the threats. Julian's response was immediate and fierce. He told her to stay put, that he was coming right over. Then he said something that made Abigail's heart skip. He promised that his mother would never touch Oliver, that he would handle this once and for all. Within 20 minutes, Julian was at her door. He wrapped Abigail in his arms, letting her shake against him as the fear finally overwhelmed her. He assured her over and over that Oliver was safe, that they were safe, that he wouldn't let anything happen to their family. But Julian's expression was dark with determination. He told Abigail he needed to go confront his mother immediately. This had gone too far. Abigail grabbed his arm, asking him to be careful. Julian kissed her forehead gently and promised he would be back soon. Then he was gone, driving through the city toward the Hartwell estate with a clarity of purpose he had never felt before. The Hartwell mansion loomed ahead, all stone and grandeur and cold perfection. Julian had grown up in this house, but it had never felt like a home. He walked through the front door without knocking, finding his mother in her private sitting room, sipping tea as if she hadn't just threatened to steal his child. Catherine looked up as he entered, her expression serene. She greeted him pleasantly, asking if he wanted tea. Julian didn't sit down. He stood before his mother and told her in no uncertain terms that she had crossed a line. Going to Abigail's home, threatening to take Oliver, all of it ended now. Catherine set down her teacup with deliberate care. She said she was simply looking out for the family's best interests. The child deserved to be raised properly, not in some tiny apartment by a woman with no breeding or education. Julian felt his temper snap. He told his mother that Abigail had more class and integrity in her little finger than Catherine had in her entire body. Abigail had raised Oliver alone because Julian had been too weak to stand up to his mother's manipulation. But he wasn't that weak anymore. He had found something more important than the family business or the Hartwell name. He had found love, real love, and a family worth fighting for. Catherine's face hardened. She reminded Julian that everything he had, his position, his wealth, his lifestyle, came from the Hartwell family. If he chose that woman and her baby over his own mother, there would be consequences. Julian nodded slowly. He understood perfectly. That was why he was formally resigning from Hartwell Industries, effective immediately. He would liquidate his personal assets and start his own company. He didn't need his mother's money or her approval. The shock on Catherine's face was evident. She stood abruptly, telling him he was being foolish, throwing away his birthright for a brief infatuation. Julian corrected her firmly. It wasn't infatuation. It was love. Real, deep, lasting love. The kind of love Catherine had never understood because she valued power and status above all else. He felt sorry for her, actually. She was so focused on controlling everyone around her that she had forgotten how to simply care about people. Julian continued, his voice steady and sure. He told his mother that she had a choice. She could either accept Abigail and Oliver as part of the family, treat them with respect and kindness, or she could have no relationship with any of them. That included Julian. He was done being manipulated. He was done prioritizing his mother's demands over his own happiness and the well-being of the people he loved. The decision was hers, but he wouldn't wait long for an answer. Catherine stared at her son as if seeing a stranger. She had always been able to control Julian, to guide his decisions through a combination of guilt and obligation. But the man standing before her now was different. He had found something she couldn't take away or diminish. After a long silence, Catherine sat back down, suddenly looking older and more tired. She asked quietly if Julian truly loved this woman. Julian's answer was immediate and certain. He loved Abigail more than anything in the world. She was the strongest, most resilient person he had ever met. She had gone through pregnancy and childbirth alone, had built a life for their son without any help, all while dealing with the heartbreak he had caused. She was remarkable, and he would spend the rest of his life trying to deserve her. And Oliver, their son, was perfect. He had his mother's determination and warmth, and Julian was grateful every day that he got a second chance to be the father Oliver deserved. Something in Catherine's expression shifted. Then, perhaps it was hearing the absolute conviction in her son's voice. Perhaps it was the realization that she was about to lose him entirely. She asked what Julian wanted from her. He said he wanted her to leave Abigail alone, to stop interfering in their lives. If Catherine could do that, if she could treat Abigail with respect, then maybe in time they could build some kind of relationship. But it had to be on Julian's terms, not hers. Catherine was silent for a long moment. Finally, she nodded slowly. She said she would try, though she made no promises about liking the situation. Julian accepted that. He didn't need his mother to like Abigail just to respect his choices. He left the mansion feeling lighter than he had in years, as if he had finally shed a burden he had been carrying his entire life. When Julian returned to Abigail's apartment, he found her sitting on the floor playing with Oliver. She looked up anxiously as he entered, searching his face for clues about what had happened. Julian knelt beside them and took her hands in his. He told her everything about his confrontation with Catherine, about his decision to leave the family business, about choosing their small family over everything else. Abigail's eyes filled with tears. She asked if he was sure, if he really wanted to give up so much. Julian smiled and told her he wasn't giving up anything that mattered. He was gaining everything. He looked at Oliver, then back at Abigail, and his next words came straight from his heart. He said he knew he had hurt her terribly, that he had failed her when she needed him most. But he had spent the last few months learning what it meant to be a real partner, a real father. He wanted to spend the rest of his life continuing that journey with her. Then Julian did something Abigail never expected. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple but beautiful ring. It wasn't ostentatious or showy, just an elegant band with a single diamond that caught the light. Julian told her this wasn't about grand gestures or trying to buy her forgiveness. This was about commitment, about promising to stand by her through everything. He asked if she would marry him, not because of Oliver, not because of obligation, but because he loved her and wanted to build a life together. Abigail looked at the ring, then at Julian's hopeful face, then at their son playing contentedly between them. She thought about everything they had been through, all the pain and struggle and lonely nights. But she also thought about the last few months, watching Julian transform into a devoted father, feeling her love for him rekindled despite her best efforts to guard her heart. She realized that holding on to past hurt would only prevent future happiness. She said yes. Julian's face broke into the most genuine smile she had ever seen. He slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then pulled her into a kiss that felt like coming home. Oliver made a happy gurgling sound between them, and they both laughed, pulling apart to include their son in the embrace. In that moment, surrounded by love in her tiny apartment, Abigail felt richer than any mansion could make her. The wedding was small and intimate, nothing like the society events Catherine would have planned. They were married in a park on a sunny Saturday afternoon, with just a handful of close friends as witnesses. Abigail wore a simple white dress that made her look radiant. Oliver, now 6 months old, was held by Julian's best friend during the ceremony. When the officiant pronounced them married, Julian kissed his bride like she was the most precious thing in the world because to him she was. Catherine Hartwell attended, sitting in the back row. She didn't smile much, but she was there, and that was a start. After the ceremony, she approached Abigail stiffly and said she hoped Abigail would be happy. It wasn't warm or particularly sincere, but it was civil, and Abigail accepted it graciously. Building bridges would take time, but at least they were beginning. Julian started his own marketing consultancy firm. Using his industry connections and expertise to build something from the ground up, it was challenging and sometimes frightening, but having Abigail's support made all the difference. She joined his company as a partner, her creative ideas blending perfectly with his business acumen. They worked from a small office downtown, with Oliver's playpen set up in the corner. It wasn't conventional, but it was theirs. On their first anniversary, Julian surprised Abigail with a photo album. Inside were pictures from Oliver's first year, including several that Julian had missed before he knew about his son. Abigail had shared them with him, helping him feel connected to those lost months. But Julian had also added new photos from Oliver's first smile that he witnessed, to his first time sitting up, to their small wedding. The last page had a space left empty, with a note in Julian's handwriting that said, "For all the moments still to come." Abigail looked up at her husband with tears in her eyes. Julian pulled her close and whispered that he was grateful every day that she had posted that photo, that she had given him a second chance, that she had chosen to forgive him despite everything. He promised to never take their family for granted, to cherish every ordinary moment, every late-night feeding and every early morning chaos, as they sat together watching Oliver take his first wobbly steps across their living room. Both parents beaming with pride, Abigail realized that happiness didn't look like she had once imagined. It wasn't about luxury or status or having everything perfect. It was about these simple moments of connection and love. She had started as a heartbroken woman facing single motherhood, unsure if she could survive the challenges ahead. But she had survived, and more than that, she had built something beautiful. Julian caught her eye and smiled, the same warm smile that had made her fall in love with him in the first place. This time, though, she knew that smile was backed by commitment, by proven devotion, by the kind of love that weathered storms and came out stronger. Their story hadn't been easy, but the difficult chapters had led them to this moment of peace and contentment. Oliver toddled between his parents, laughing with pure joy, and they both reached out to steady him. Their hands met, fingers intertwining, and in that simple gesture was everything they had fought for. A family, a real, imperfect, beautiful family built on love, forgiveness, and second chances. And as the sun set outside their windows, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Abigail knew with absolute certainty that every struggle had been worth it to arrive at this perfect moment.